Welcome to Koffee Talks with Dan Norton and David Person.
So Dan, you're gonna kill me.
What did you do this time?
Dan, I thought this was a codcast. I thought we were gonna go fishing for cod. So I feel completely unprepared today. And I don't know what I've got to say, although most days I really am unprepared and don't say anything anyways. But are you concerned that I'm not gonna be able to bring my A game because I'm actually looking forward to getting into a boat and going out fishing?
I'm not worried because I don't even think this breaks the top 10 weirdest things you've done to start one of these.
All right, Dan. Maybe we should do that one time, like the top 10. That would be interesting. Here's one of the most top 10 things you've done to start one of these things, which is get a haircut. And it's not the haircut itself, Dan. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, it is so flashy. I mean, it is so bougie. I don't even know what to do with it. Yeah, you keep showing it. Unbelievable. It's scary, Dan. I will never doubt you nor argue with you again. But do you want to tell everybody how long it took you to do that? Because we were supposed to podcast or codcast almost an hour and a half ago, and you were an hour and a half late due to your hairstylist apparently spending her entire day styling your hair.
Can I say I bumped it back by an hour and then you added an extra half an hour because you were still lifting? Well, yeah, my appointment was at 1 my time and I was done by 4:30. So it was about 3.5 hours all in to get it cut, bleached, and then dyed. Because my natural hair is really dark, so it takes a long time for the bleach to set in.
Dan, I haven't spent 3.5 hours cutting my hair in the last 10 years combined. So why don't you tell our audience, because we're going to talk about something relevant later, how much did that set you back, Dan? How much does a 3.5 hour cut, bleach, dye, get to know somebody, have a beer, whatever, you don't drink, sorry. How much did that set you back, Dan?
It was $41 plus tip because I get it cut at the hairdressing academy, so it's people who are in training who cut it, so it's really cheap.
All right, Dan, I'll be flying in the future for all of my haircuts because at $41 plus tip, it's actually worth a flight there on Spirit Airlines. I think that's less than it cost me to cut my hair. So thank you for the tips. Anybody that wants to know where Dan's having his hair done and how to fly into the airport, I'm sure he'd be glad to pick you up, talk a little bit about Pokemon cards, get you to the hairstylist at the academy, and then get you home.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Dan, you told me a couple of podcasts ago that my stalker, and I think I've identified her, but I won't go any further than that. Her name is Emily. You know who you are. I cannot stand you. Thank you for your fanmanship, but it doesn't work. You told me that there was no way she was going to be able to get to my home, okay? Well, I'm going to tell you what I found on the front. I'm actually going to show you what I found on the front door today. So here you go. For those of you that think that Emily had no chance of finding me, this is from Emily, okay? So for whatever it's worth, I'm going to leave it at that. And Dan, I'm going to say once again, to the pleasure of all those watching, except those that don't like when I say this, you were wrong.
I said she couldn't get into the house because it's fully surrounded. But I mean, if a stalker is just leaving you expensive Pokemon plush, then I need a stalker as well.
I thought Laura was your stalker. I guess not. It's too many years of marriage. I think
I'll tell you
said
what.
like
In terms of plush, Law was planning our Disneyland trip outfits for each day at Disneyland. She wants to do Disney bounding, which is where you dress up a bit like a character. And I gave her my credit card and said, you can use my credit card to buy our Disney bounding outfits. And then she messaged me and was like, oh, I also bought $200 worth of plush from the Pokemon Center.
oh, jeez. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Okay, well, that's gonna tie in real nicely to our topic of the day when we get there. We may
Yeah.
never get there with me continuing to talk, but
Yeah.
Dan, today you sent me some messages because you're kind enough to try to communicate with me on an ongoing basis, just to let me know I'm still valued as a human being. I'm still relevant. And today you told me that folks are moving. I don't know what the words are anymore. Dan, just throw in a word, but basically they're sharing my number one trophy post off my Instagram page on a few different Facebook groups. And
Yeah.
so that got me to thinking that doesn't seem right to me in the sense of when you share someone else's information, their posts, shouldn't you be giving them credit? Like it was disappointing and I never comment on anything, but today I was in a mood. So I went on those two Facebook group posts and I said, "Hey guys, this is my card. I posted on my Instagram. It'd be nice if you give me credit." And then I gave some information about the card that everybody was wondering about, like how much it was worth and everything. Am I right or wrong in my idea that folks, if they take something from another person's site, should share that where it came from?
You're right in that they should, but especially on Facebook, there are so many pages that rack up millions of views and hundreds of comments just by stealing and reposting other people's Pokemon content from TikTok and from Instagram. If you go into any one of those pages, if you look at just what they've posted, you can see that every single post is clearly in a different place. It's done in a different style. There's nothing consistent because they're just taking other people's content, which sucks because Facebook really does nothing about it. There's Instagram pages as well that do it, but I think the culture around people on Instagram is generally more that they'll get called out or that people will spam them with comments saying this is stolen content from someone else. Whereas on Facebook, everyone just takes it at face value. It gets shared, it goes through the algorithms, that kind of thing. I only found one of them literally because one of them popped up on my Facebook feed like as an advert, and I was like, oh, I don't follow the page. I was like, oh, I know that card. That's David's. So I recognize his kitchen. And that's when I commented on it. And then because I commented on it, I then got the same post from other pages sent to me again. Like it's really awful, but Facebook is a horrid place for it.
Do you want to tell everybody how you recognize my kitchen so well, Dan, and be honest?
Well, other than the fact that I've been there a lot of times, it's because you use the same bit of your kitchen and the same backdrop for every photo. It's that weird tile pattern. And I've taken my own photos of stuff there because it's the only place in your house that has decent lighting that doesn't reflect on everything.
All right, Dan, if you want to put my house down, that's fine. But I'm going to say that it may have something to do with the fact that you're constantly and incessantly gobbling up food in my kitchen when you're here. It's amazing we ever get to the card room. Okay, Dan, I'm kidding. Okay, well, just a minute. Now we lost 2 followers or viewers. It's just a joke, guys. Sure, he eats a lot. Sure, he loves to eat. It's all right. You got to eat in the kitchen. You have to eat at some point. I don't have a problem with it. Let it go. All right, Dan, I want you to talk about. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Last thing about this. I seriously want to do the museum thing. We cannot do it in a physical way. So we moved to this idea of a virtual museum, which we've talked about a lot. How is that going to be able to be prevented with anything we put out there being shared all over the place? Is it going to be have it to be a situation that theoretically, and whether or not you know, Dan, or somebody that's watching knows, when we go in and we scan those images and we say, here's every single card from every single set, and whatever we choose to do we are going to have to put some disclaimer, my little something on the picture in a prevalent way, in a corner of a way, not to disturb the picture, but a way that if people share it makes it much more difficult for them to just share without giving credit?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, if you were doing a virtual museum where it's just photographs of the cards, you're going to have to put a watermark on it to stop people stealing it, which then kind of takes away from what people want. But the thing is, even if you put a watermark on it, people are still going to steal the images and just repost it, either by like cropping off the watermark or just by pretending they don't know what it is. I mean, if you look through those Facebook comments on those posts, no one knows what they're looking at. There's comments ranging from it's fake to this is one of one, there's only one copy of this in the world and the winner still has it, to people saying, oh, this is definitely graded. Someone said this is $600,000 minimum. No one knows what they're looking at. If you put a watermark on it as well, they're still not going to know what they're looking at. They're not going to know that that watermark isn't supposed to be there. So yeah, sadly, people will still just take and repost the photos.
When you say that to me, it really drives home the point of how much information we could provide with that kind of site. Just something where you've written a part of it that says, hey, there's actually 12 of these cards. It's almost like a Bulbapedia type of situation, but it's very
Yeah.
brief, with descriptions, but lets people get there and understand exactly what it is they're looking at.
But
I'm
it's
just
that thing
wondering if anybody.
it's that thing we've always said. People don't want the true information. Even if we put it up saying there's 12 of them and the value is about $100,000, the person who steals the photo is still going to post it and say one of one in existence that's worth $1 million because that's more interesting from the page. And the people commenting on it aren't going to know any better. They're not going to go, oh, well, I better go to some online museum and independently verify this. They're going to go, wow, crazy, you should have this graded, like they always do, because they're just going to go for what they think is real and exciting.
So that brings up another point that's just, really, again, I'm trying to create and be creative here. Maybe we've joked for years about I don't do a Patreon because I don't need the dollars or whatever. I'm not trying to be arrogant. It's just not worth having people pay to me, for me. but maybe this would be the situation to actually do a Patreon. And I don't know, maybe it wouldn't keep everyone away, but keep most of the people that weren't serious about it away. And again, everybody knows that anything I would make on a Patreon or whatever, I would always donate to charity. But I just wonder if that's a possibility, just to try to make something where, as I talked about, if I had a real museum and people walked in, they'd pay some admission fee, and then that would all go to charity. But this might be a way to create a site that's specifically intended for those a bit more serious than those that are just looking to steal content.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. Patreon maybe isn't the best actual site to do that, because Patreon is more about like a monthly subscription, whereas you'd be looking for more of a like pay for entry type thing. Like people could like pay to get a membership to the site and view the site at all times. I don't think you'd want people to pay monthly, because I guess really we wouldn't be up once we got it all in. It would only be minor updates every month until we like hit Worlds or whatever. Then there'd be a big update that people would want to see. So either a site with like a yearly subscription or just a pay to join might be something that people are interested in. But again, all it does take is one person to join and download everything, and then it gets shared. Because when we look at the numbers that those posts were getting, I don't know how well Facebook does in terms of paying for you getting likes and stuff on posts. I don't know if they do, but Instagram and now Twitter and other places will pay you based on how many likes and shares and stuff you get. So if they can make $100 from sharing your post of the number one trainer, it's worth them paying the $10 to come and steal the photo, I mean, maybe it makes it more likely that they don't know where it is, but as soon as one person figures it out, then they've all got it. So
To anybody that's watching that's technology oriented, or might have a friend or two that's technology oriented, someone you've got captive in your basement that nobody's known about for 20 years, that's, you can ask them a question, maybe they'll help you out, you let them escape. Is there any possible way these days to put pictures up and make it so they are not copyable, not transferable, people can't just come and take them, copy them, and move them? I'm just wondering if there's any type of program any of you know about that might allow for that type of situation. So,
I know there's
okay.
ways on websites where you can like code it so that people can't right click, so they can't just save the picture. But I don't know if there's any way to stop like just hitting the print screen button and then cropping it later. I don't know if that's
Okay.
a
Well,
thing you can do.
hopefully somebody will let us know. So,
Yeah.
so Dan, just a quick question for you. And I know you're not a big fan of causing controversy, but you've said this on a few times, and I would just like to understand your thoughts on this. The topic is Poke Beach. So when I look at Poke Beach, I see someone in something in some site that seems to be in tune with everything Pokemon. Like they've got the first access to whatever they're releasing. And you've made it clear that that is not the case, or shouldn't be the
Right.
case, or isn't the case. And so I would like you to discuss your frustrations with Poke Beach. And maybe along with that, where is it that people can be looking and feel good that they're actually getting the real and bona fide Pokemon information?
Yeah, so it's quite funny we're talking about these two topics back to back. One of my big things that I dislike about Poke Beach is they do take other people's content and repost it claiming it's their own, or they credit it to one of their like 3 or 4 people, even when it's someone else who's done the work. So anytime they post something saying exclusive, we've got the first look, it's not the first look. They're Even if it's a very early post, they're one of 50 sites that have access to some of this stuff where it's not coming directly from Pokemon, it's coming from distributors or whatever, or there's brand folders go out for different things. I don't know how much I can really say about behind the scenes stuff, but a lot of people get access to it at once. So whenever they say something's exclusive, it isn't. And I say they, it's one guy, his name's John. He's not a nice person. They, for years insisted that everything was done themselves, and they said that any of the claims that they were stealing stuff was false and bogus and whatever. And then a number of years back, Nathan, who runs Bulbapedia, I will say I know a ton of stories about Poke Beach. I'm only going to talk about the ones that are common knowledge, because there's other stuff I know which I don't know how comfortable people will be with me sharing stuff. one of the big ones was Nathan was obviously doing translations for new cards when they were revealed in Japanese, and he was posting the translations, and he was pretty sure PokeBeach were just copy pasting all of his translations and claiming it as their own work, saying that they'd personally done all this translation stuff. So for a couple of sets, he put deliberate mistakes in his translations. So a couple of just minor things where if you just read through the stuff, you're not going to go, oh, there's no way that card does that. You're going to look at it and go, yeah, that's probably what that card does. It's some really minor things, but they were mistakes where if you were actually translating, you would never make that mistake. And then, lo and behold, an hour after he posts it, PokeBeach's post goes up. Oh, these are all our translations. We did them all ourselves, and they have the same mistakes in it. So he's put that to prove that PokeBeach were stealing his work and crediting themselves or crediting others with it. And I don't know the full ins and outs with it, but I know that PokeBeach as a site is really not in good standing with TPCI over just various controversies and things they've done in the past that they shouldn't. Like I say, I don't know the 100% details on that, so I'm going to avoid it in case it falls too much into speculation and they throw up arms or something about it. But in addition to the site doing that, basically the guy who runs it has completely alienated himself from every other big like news creator out there. So I know that all of the other people who run like news sites and stuff, as opposed to like drama channels or entertainment stuff, whatever, just will not communicate with him because of just how much of an awful person he is.
Can you tell Dan? Your name is Dan. I'm just edit that out, Dan, because I don't. I do know your name, and I don't want to act like I don't. So, can you tell the viewers what other sites you use, or would you like to recommend a site or two that would be maybe as comprehensive, but maybe a bit more legitimate in their putting out new release Pokemon information?
Well, so see, I still use Bulbapedia a decent amount. I use the Bulbapedia or the Bulba news section a little bit less than I use the main Bulbapedia. But Cerebi is a fantastic website. Poke Guardian is another one. I use those two sites a lot when I'm verifying information. So those would be the big sites I would recommend for like new breaking news are Cerebi and Poke Guardian.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. All right. So let me break really quickly and just I need to introduce myself to the audience because I know that folks don't really know who I am. So, hey guys, my name is David Person. I hope you like my hat, and I am a pokeaholic. Uh, and then the audience would say, Dan, if you know, you should be in the meetings that we're having. You should say something like, you want to try it, Dan? You know where I'm going or not?
Hi, David. Everyone just goes, hi, David, like that.
You got it. There it is.
Yeah,
Great job. Good job, Dan.
yeah,
So let's move on to our topic from that we kind of we ended the last podcast with, which was addiction.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm going to read a little bit here just from some stuff that I've kind of wrote down. So it says in psychology, addiction is defined as a chronic, relapsing disorder characterized by, and there's a few different categories. Okay. So there's compulsive substance use or behavior, loss of control, tolerance, meaning you need more and more of something to basically get a high, withdrawal, meaning, of course, if you take away what you're enjoying, you're going to have some kind of withdrawal symptoms, neglecting responsibilities as a potential another factor, and continued use despite negative consequences. Okay. So before we have a discussion about this, I'm going to talk about the difference between chemical substance abuse and behavioral abuse. Okay. Behavioral addiction. I'm going to move away from chemicals because it is somewhat relevant in the way that your brain is affected. But let's talk about behaviors because for those that are watching, hopefully you'll find this interesting. These are the categories of behavioral abuse with respect to addiction. So the main types of behavioral addictions are food addiction, exercise addiction, a couple of things I can't mention because Dan won't let me for the site so that we can make sure we are family oriented addiction, exercise addiction, work addiction, religious, shopping, video game, gambling, and internet. And the reason I bring all those different categories up is because I think it's interesting as you guys look at yourselves and I look and question myself reflectively. Do I just have one of those or do I have several of those? Right. And goes back to sort of personality tendencies, whether or not those come from family and hereditary and genes, or whether or not there's something that comes into our own individual behaviors. So I know for me personally, there are several of those. I'll just give you an example of one. I've certainly had an exercise addiction my entire life. It's unhealthy. That's the whole point of addiction. When you get to the point that it's unhealthy, that you're still doing it at the age of almost 64, and you're lifting as much as you did when you're 20, because you cannot give up the idea that you should look a certain way or you don't want to lose the body or whatever. And again, we could talk more about that in a different podcast because I've actually done CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, to try to address those things. But when these are in the mental framework of who you are as a human being, it really becomes interesting to try to change it. It takes a lot of effort, time, effort, therapy, et cetera, to change it. So, Dan, as I mentioned addiction, and some people have alluded in our comments, I mean, I think it was cute because Craig, two people I've talked to that have mentioned that they're like these master set collectors of every single set. One is Craig, and one is Matt. I think it's Matt DeGraff of DeGraff Floor Stores or something. They're both over 20,000 cards, probably much higher than that now, and still going strong. I know Craig has said, well, he will admit to having an addiction. You and I do to some degree. And when do you kind of turn that down or tone it off to a certain degree or stop it right at that line where it doesn't become consequential in a negative way to the rest of your life?
Well, it's a very, very hard topic to really go into on this. Basically, I've kind of made peace with my addiction in that I don't want to try and stop with my trading card addiction, mainly because I just know that I have an addictive personality. Whatever I get into, I really, really get into it. So for the last 20 years it's been trading cards, but there's times when if I was into video gaming, I was really into video gaming. There are still times where if I start playing a video game I really like, I'm addicted to it until I'm done with that video game. It's just I focus on one thing. Part of that is to do with I think my ADHD, which I am now medicated for. I have that hyper focus on something, but generally it feels like a trading card addiction is way less destructive than a lot of other addictions. Partly because if you're spending all of your money on trading cards have value. There is always the idea that if you just completely run out of money, like if we ever got to the point where we spent so much money we were going to lose the house, whatever, the cards are there. If you then I have to go cold turkey, you can recoup the money that you spent. With other addictions, you can't. That isn't a thing. A lot of addictions are keeping the channel not age restricted, are things that are consumed, let's say, in one way or another. So you have no way of recouping any of the money that you've put into that addiction. And this addiction also doesn't affect physical health in as much of a drastic way as other addictions do. I mean, do I get less exercise than I would if I was, not doing stuff with trading cards all the time? Sure, but I think that I just kind of know I'm the kind of person who is going to have some kind of addiction. And so I think I found one that is healthy enough where I don't want to try and move on from it to another addiction, because I do still enjoy this. I do still have fun. This isn't like, I don't have that symptom like you mentioned of continuing with this, even hating it or having a bad time. I am still, there are bad times in collecting, but I'm overall still enjoying the experience. So I'm not at that point. I think that a lot of people in trading card collecting do have an addiction, even if they don't admit it, because the nature of trading cards is very predatory. That's the way it is. You have randomized booster packs, you have those chase cards, you literally have the, keep going, the next pack might be the right one, the next pack might be the god pack, the next pack might be your Umbreon.
Gambling.
Gambling,
Yes.
yeah. It's legally not gambling, I guess, because of officially each card is worth the same. It's just what the secondary market decides, blah, blah, blah. Pokemon aren't out there saying you're going to open the $1,000 card. They're out there saying this card is in 0.01% of booster packs, but on our end, it's still a 45-cent card. That's just legally, that's the way it is. But because of that, because of the gambling aspect of it and the preying on FOMO, that kind of thing, there's all of the, you need to go get this product now because it's going to sell out. All of that is going to draw in people who are more susceptible to that level of marketing, or more susceptible to that kind of thing. And that is going to be people who have an addictive personality, who can develop addictions on one level or another. Like, addiction isn't just you have no addiction or you're 100% addicted and you're an addict and you're ruining your life. There are levels to addiction. There are people who can, will just buy occasional booster packs or buy the occasional beer or whatever, but can't ever stop. There aren't people who are spending every penny they've got on these things, but there are people who do need to constantly be doing it. So I think there are more people in card collecting who have addictions than will say it or who even realize it.
Well, so a few thoughts on what you said. Number one, I think it's important to note for anybody watching, and I think Dan's kind of alluding to this from himself, and he and I are very similar in this, in that you can't resolve a problem unless you know you have one. And so Dan and I happen to be two people who understand the addictive nature of our own personalities, and that if we aren't monitoring this to some degree, it could certainly become a problem. So I think that's part one of it. Part two, when you talk, Dan, about the ADHD nature of yourself, that actually throws me the other direction than you went. So to me, those in my life that have ADHD, the ability to focus is oftentimes literally not there. And so, one could argue this is a way of focusing, but if you really have ADHD, say, for example, my son, he can't focus on anything for any length of time. So, to sit down and do something that's concerted with your binders and your tracking and your counting and your set building, to me, that would be the exact opposite. It would be hard for me to believe that a lot of ADHD people would be involved in this, because I would see it exactly the opposite, that they would have a tough time with a hobby like this, at least from past the stage of acquisition, from actually maintenance.
Well, from the conversations I've had with my doctor about it, ADHD in children and ADHD in adults presents very, very differently. And adults with ADHD, like, they literally diagnose it as adult ADHD. They diagnose it in a completely separate way. So when I talk about being super focused on something, it isn't kind of, it's not I can sit down and decide I'm going to focus on this. It's, if I get into it, I just get hyper focused to the point where I can't then stand up and say I'm going to take a break. It's like, if I decide I'm sorting cards, it's like, I'm doing this, and there have been days where if I just get so focused on sorting cards, I've gone days forgetting to eat. Like, I'll have my breakfast, I'll go downstairs, and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to sort cards, and then Law's knocking on the door saying, Dan, it's 7 p.m. We need to have dinner. Because it's not just being able to, like, the ADHD hyperfocus thing is not being able to say, I can sit down, I can focus without distractions. It's when my body decides, or my mind decides it's time to focus on that, it's well locked onto that and that only, to the detriment of other things.
I'm going to recommend right here that you do an edit. I think what you need to say is not that you forgot to eat, but that you forgot to give your wife the attention she deserves. So make sure to put that in and edit that differently, because I think that she'll really appreciate that. Okay.
My wife's at work while I'm doing this. It's fine. Working in the bedroom,
wait a minute. So that presumes she never watches any podcasts?
No, I mean, but my wife's at work when I'm doing this hyperfocus thing all day.
Okay.
It's fine.
Dan, let me challenge you on another point, because I think that, and I don't mean this in any negative way. I just think that, again, we can justify, a lot of times with addiction, we justify things. So when I hear you say, well, I've always got them to sell if I need to or whatever, there's an underlying presumption or assumption that they'll always be worth money. And yes, maybe that's true 90% of the time, 95% of the time, but maybe all of a sudden we're in a recession or a depression and they aren't worth money, at least not at that point. Maybe something horrible happens and it's not even a hobby anymore. So, from a justification standpoint, I'm not a big fan of that. And I'm also not a big fan of you saying, hey, oftentimes, well, it's not going to be that costly for people. And the reason I bring that up is because there's a short-term costly and there's a long-term costly. And so let me give you an example without naming names. But recently in my life, I know of someone who just started, who felt like they were going to start collecting Pokemon as an adult. And in that situation, they don't have really any money set aside for their children's education. They haven't bought their first home or anything. And so I was really concerned about that because I think that you should not put the cart before the horse. And I think they didn't understand the addictive nature of the potential of gaming. By the way, there was medicine involved, to where I talked to some other nurse practitioners and they were letting me know that, do you understand that there's actually now uh, games like Pokemon are considered, gambling with games of Pokemon are considered something you should be watching out for as a nurse in people when it comes to gambling. It's actually been defined in the DSM, so the medical journals and stuff. So the idea was, my frustration was, they didn't see the addictive nature. They didn't see that they were putting that cart before the horse and already willing to go out and spend all this money. And they were going to start building binders. And I'm thinking to myself, you're making a huge mistake. It's wonderful that you have this, but go focus on what should really important, which should be your family, buying a house, taking care of the children, etc. And yet maybe they also have justifications or ways they can do it. They didn't have a lot of money in the bank at all. So again, I think that, but I also know the person to have a addictive personality through another category of addiction. And so to me, I could see everything bright and clear, but they had no idea what they were about to endeavor into.
Well, when I was saying about them having value and using that justification, that was in contrast to other addictions that are out there. Because if it does get to the point where, all cards are worthless, all of my collection is worth nothing, that only puts me in the same position as those other addictions. It doesn't make me worse off financially than if I had one of those other addictions. It just puts me in the same place. So, in terms of the value and stuff that cards have, the worst case scenario is that I'm in the same place I would be with a different addiction, but there are better case scenarios financially. Again, as I've said, I I know I'm doing the justification thing, but I do fully understand that I'm not saying I'm not addicted. I'm not saying it's fine. I'm just saying I feel I'm always going to be addicted to something, and on the scale of things I could be addicted to, collecting Pokemon cards is relatively one of the better ones.
Yeah, I do think that makes sense. I mean, I really do. I guess a few thoughts on that. So, with respect to addiction, it's amazing when these things combine, right? So, just to give you some examples. So, uh, there's been times in the last few weeks when Prismatic was coming out and everything, that I will catch myself out there, and I'll be out there searching and searching and searching for hours at a time for trying to buy some kind of Prismatic, for investment, for collecting, for whatever I'm looking for, and the hours go by. And so really you're talking about the possibility of a shopping addiction. You're talking about an addiction of being on the internet too much time. You're talking about the Pokemon card addiction. It all sort of envelops each other inside of the same thing. And I believe that through the entirety of my lifetime, when I've collected these, and I've been a collector since I was a child, I believe that I do justify. And, I've had that conversation with my wife many times. She's like, you're out of control. And I'm like, honey, it's all going to turn out fine in the end. But I guess I didn't really know that at the time, right? When we were out there and we were spending 3 and 5,000, 7,000, and then we bought a number one trophy at 14,000, and I bought the 2004 number one for 13,000 years later, and I bought a pre-release Raichu for 10.5. These were large numbers. I'm not a trust fund baby. I had to earn all this money myself, still working at 63 to make sure I've got income to pay for what I'm buying. So I did a lot of justifying of this, and I probably still do. Luckily, I've come over the hump now because I've had things for enough years that I've been able to sell enough things to make sure that I'm going to be okay financially. But I do look back and, in self-reflection, I think, gosh, I did a lot of justifying of those expenses, and that probably wasn't exactly the fairest way to go about it, but I just did.
Yeah.
So, and then as a collector, you start to feel like, well, I'm missing that. I'm missing that. And we've always had that situation with me. Well, we want to make sure we complete the whole. I've never
Yeah.
had a patience about me, but I've never really felt like I crossed the line. Fortunately, that cost me anything, harmful to my family. When you talk, Dan, about things that you end up with better than, this is a better addiction, if that's a relative term, than something else. You guys probably know what I do for a living. I'm a financial advisor, and I talk about when we invest our clients' money, the entirety of that entire process is the entirety of that entire process. Well, that's a lot of entires. The entirety of that process is, I call it to my clients, legalized gambling. The stock markets are nothing more than legalized gambling. And so the folks that turn on their computers every day and look and see how their stocks are doing or their Bitcoin or whatever else, a lot of them have that same, if you're looking at it every single day, that's an addictive behavior versus clients we try to train, look at it once a month, once a quarter, whatever. So I always suggest if you're going to have some kind of addiction, go buy stocks or maybe go buy Pokemon cards. If you have to do something for the reason that you said, Dan, that you then at
Yeah.
least have something that you've put away, as opposed to when I realized I was 19 or 20 years old and I was taking the bus with the old ladies. It was younger than that, 16 or 17 years old. I had a full beard. I was faking being 19 or 20, took the old lady buses up to Tahoe and Reno and whatever, and gambled and lost all my money and realized very early I was losing all my money. I was an addictive gambler and there was no way I could sustain that through a lifetime.
One of the other things that when I talk about stuff online about stuff that I bought, a lot of people do jump in with like, "Oh, how do you afford this?" And obviously, any money I make is from like card shows, selling some cards, a little bit of money through YouTube, not very much. And Law has a decent job, but one of the big things for me affording this, and well, me and Law together affording this stuff, is this is our only vice. Trading cards are our only vice. We don't drink, like we don't drink alcohol at all, so we don't go on like nights out. We're not the people. You'll see people who are buying and selling cards. Lots of people on Instagram all the time. Their stories just always them at a club with someone bringing them over bottles of champagne, bottle service. We don't do any of that. We don't really. We don't go. We definitely don't go eat at very fancy restaurants. We only very occasionally go out to a nice restaurant. For us, spending like $100 per person or $75 per person on a meal is considered a once a month, once every 2 months special occasion. Whereas for a lot of people, that's just what they do. We shop fairly thriftily with food. If we're having a treat, it's some fast food that's not very expensive. We don't smoke. We don't. I mean, anything else that you can think of that you would spend a lot of money on regularly, we basically don't do. Like
So
that's
let
where it
me
comes from.
Right. You're making good choices. You're aware of what you're doing. But also there are consequences, right? Like I'm just as an example. And by the way, let me correct one thing immediately because you said trading cards are your own vice, are your only vice. So that's not true, and we know that. What I'm going to say is I'm going to call them. I don't know how to classify this, but it's kids games because the reasons or childhood lore or something because it's not just trading cards, it's plush. It's when you go on trips, you're always doing Disney or those kinds of things, and you're buying the things to dress up as characters. So
That,
maybe the
that
kinds of
those are laws vices that I've been dragged into.
okay, but I want to be
I guess
realistic with
I
it.
owned some plush. I owned a very small amount of plush, but yeah, other stuff
Yeah,
like that is like the. But I guess it's our Disney trips are tacked onto Worlds. Like Worlds is our big yearly trip, and then we do Disney if Worlds is close by, basically. But that's still like that's our yearly trip. We budget for that. We're not just. I mean, there are Disney adults who fly out to Florida every other weekend and go to the Disney parks every other weekend because that's their main vice or that's their big thing. We're not that level of people. On a like day to day, ongoing throughout the year vice, on a monthly budget or a weekly budget vice, Pokemon cards is it. Other stuff is like a once a year expense.
Yeah, and again, for those that are watching, I'm not sitting here and trying to put Dan down. I'm a financial advisor. And so, as a financial advisor, you should understand that you need to have so many months of emergency dollars sitting in accounts in case somebody loses a job, 6 months of income or whatever. You should have some kind of medical expense situation for above and beyond insurance coverage that you might need if something goes wrong. You should have longer term goals. Not that everybody does have them. So maybe you want to buy a bigger house someday. Maybe you want to do more grandiose traveling, whatever. You should. It's very different if you have children. Dan and Laura don't have children, albeit they have two dogs that are just like children. And so, the pup toys are a lot less expensive than college and other things. So again, it's just trying to make sure the way to combat addiction is moderation. And defining some of these other potential things that do or don't get in the way, priorities. I have never known moderation. It is the reason probably that I sit here today with the number one, or the most comprehensive English language collection. And Dan knows me. So I don't understand moderation. I've struggled with moderation. It's the reason I've struggled with food my entire life. It's the reason I've struggled with exercise my entire life. It's the reason I've struggled with, gambling and needing to stay away. And I've done the Pokemon side. It's the reason you can look at my phone and I'm on 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours a day on the internet, and whatever else I probably got all those categories lined up. So it is just very different when you can understand it and try to just be careful that you're not, take a step backwards sometimes, and maybe make sure as you're justifying, not Dan, anybody, that you're talking to your spouse, your significant other, or what you're doing, that, gosh, I just need to be careful that I'm really making sure I've got good balance here. And not that it's always, I can do this because it's always going to be worth something. Let me tell you, as a financial advisor, every one of you that has any assets at all should have a credit line. Okay. So why do we need a credit line if we have money in the bank or we have something else? Because what happens is you don't pay for a credit line unless you use it, but you need it because if something goes wrong, let's say there's an earthquake or a hurricane or something in your neighborhood and you have some damage and you are going to get paid out by insurance, but they're not going to do that for 3 or 6 months. If you don't have some kind of way to access money immediately for even a temporary situation, you get into trouble. So a lot of folks don't realize that life is about unexpected things. And that is, life is unexpected when it happens. And it's always about unexpected things. That's why we have to bob and weave and course correct all the time. So this whole diatribe is to say that you can't say, well, I'm going to be okay because I have this, because as soon as you think you're going to be okay, something's going to go wrong. And then you're not going to be able to sell something for some period of time. And then you're going to need money and you got to make sure you have reserves. So that's my entire point on this, is just for everybody to be careful. It's a wonderful hobby. I'm going to finish my comments here by saying this. In thinking about this today, which I didn't do very much thinking about, but I'm trying to do this every day and just let Dan and I sort of grow this organically. But I thought about it, I think that when we're all said and done with this podcast, this Coffee Talks, Dan and I will be known, this Coffee Talks podcast will be known as being the only true collector's podcast out there. Like Dan has said, not the drama, but the actual information, something that's out there to benefit and to be evergreen for collectors as long as the hobby shall live. And that made me proud. That made me proud for a second in time that, we do have a different slant on this. We do things a different way. We try to stay out of the drama. People like to hear about it, so we give an update. Dan does the news and stuff. I think that's important. But other than that, we worry about collecting Pokemon cards. And I hope that a lot more people will find the benefit in doing that. Last thing, I read an article last night about grandmother hobbies. Grandmother hobbies are hobbies that keep you young when you're old. So we think of the old knitting, or finding something to do when you're 50 or 60 or 70 years old that will keep your brain active. And so many of the folks, Rusty with his mom and Justin Windhorst, over at I don't know what he is, Pokey Wonder or something. All these different people are involving their moms in this whole process and filling orders and collecting cards. This can be literally a lifelong hobby, and it would be so wonderful if we could all indoctrinate our parents to it as well. But that's the peaceful nature and the continuous nature of the innocence of this hobby. And I hope that Dan and I can continue to bring that kind of content to you as we go on over the longer term.
Well, my mum is in the hobby because she's getting a load of your cards that she's holding on to ship over to me later. So that's how much she's got in, is I have to tell her how much stuff's worth and to keep it all safe until it's time to ship it over to me. So that's That's where my
The
parents
same,
are at.
the same mom who you barely remembered to wish Happy Mother's Day to. So,
I called her
gosh
and I
bless
said,
that woman.
Happy Mother's Day, but I would have remembered if it was the same day.
Yeah, of course.
Yep. So, that's what's happening. When you say we're the only true collector-based podcast, people might think, there's other collectors doing stuff too, but generally, all of the other ones that I found, even when they do a focus on collectors, there's a lot of investment talk in there usually too. Not always, flipping or anything like that, but there is a lot of like long-term investment talk and making money from it, which we're never going to do here just because I don't do it and you very rarely do it outside of just putting some boxes and stuff away for every set. You don't pick and choose which one you think is going to be a good set. You just grab some of every set and put it away. So yeah, we're not going to be investor people. We never are. It's not us.
And as far as investing goes, I told you guys recently I bought 4 cases of Journey Together. I paid $210 a box. So do I want to smack myself over the head right now for paying too much just to put them away as an investment, just to make sure I had them, so I felt like I was participating? And the answer is no. Don't beat yourselves up because now the boxes are lower. Wait 6 months, wait a year, wait 2 years, and you won't have anything to worry about. So, again, it's what's happened over the course of time. As long as demand stays where it is, in my business, my profession, I think I've mentioned to you guys before, the billion-dollar portfolio managers make the following statements: you will never buy something, you'll never buy stocks or investments at the bottom, and you'll never sell them at the top. So get used to the volatility involved in between, and don't beat yourself up. Just put it away and feel good that you've got something that's going to be worth more than what you paid at some point down the road.
And if you have an addiction to Pokemon cards, remember that it could be worse.
Yes, it could be worse, and reach out. I love to talk about it to anybody that actually feels like we can help in any way. I'm pretty wise about this stuff. Again, most important thing is just knowing you have the issues. So, but we appreciate again, you guys sharing in the dialogues. Feel free, always comment. We love it. It makes a big difference. And those of you that are doing a fantastic job of shouting us out amongst your collector friends and groups, we really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, we've gone very long today. Maybe we'll pick this topic up again tomorrow or in a couple of days' time once some comments have come in. We can maybe address some more stuff then. But I definitely feel like we should end it off here. And we'll say goodbye, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Koffee Talks with Dan Norton and David Person, with music by More Than Never and artwork by Lore Norton. A special thanks to all our Patreon members. Join us again next time.
But they don't want you to have a